Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram. I love that movie podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I love that movie. And I want to take a moment to thank our top patrons. They are Chris Balga, Michael Cross, and Philip Barker. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And then I also have Jared, who just joined the Patreon. Hi, Jared. Thank you and welcome to the team. And I always advertise he signed up for a dollar tier, and as for as little as $1 a month, you can listen to all of our coverage on The Mandalorian. So since I cover movies on here on the Patreon, I cover TV shows and other stuff. And you get a bonus episode with, every week I've been inviting a guest on, and we've been talking about The Mandalorian starting with season one. So he was actually one of my guests too, so you can listen to that on there. Um, I also have a website, a Discord, and a Facebook group, so many places to reach us. And as always, guys, if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Today, I have a guest that's returning. I have Danny Hercules on the podcast. Say hi, Danny.
Hi, Danny.
And Danny, last time we talked about Xanadu, right?
Right.
You're right. Okay. Well, if they haven't heard that episode, and they totally should, do you want to introduce yourself just a little bit?
Well, thank you for letting me introduce myself because last time I was so worried about preparing my notes and thoughts for the movie that I didn't have anything prepared when you asked your first question. Tell us about yourself. Um, so now
That sounds like you're very humble then.
I'm a little bit more prepared. I am a writer. I was a music journalist for a long time in the 80s and the 90s, covering jazz for a number of small publications in Southern California. And then I switched to writing screenplays. Some of those have been optioned, but none of them have been produced. And then I adapted one of those unsold screenplays into a novel. It's a Christmas story, into a novel called North Pole High, A Rebel Without a Clause, which I also adapted into a musical. And the story was very heavily influenced by the movie that we're going to talk about today.
That's so cool. I love it when people come on here and talk about, their passions and things that they've worked on. When you're talking about your background in music, it makes a lot of sense why we talked about Xanadu last time. And I love that there's a connection even to this movie we're about to talk about. I always let the guests pick the movie, but you did know it was Christmas season. So, what movie did you pick to talk about today?
Elf.
Yes, 2003. Um, Guys, as always, this is not a spoiler-free podcast. We will be talking spoilers, so you should absolutely go see Elf before you listen to the rest of this. I will give a quick synopsis. I'm not going to go heavy into detail on the synopsis. It's just a quick one, but basically, after discovering he is human, a man raised as an elf at the North Pole decides to travel to New York to locate his real father.
Simple, high concept premise.
Yeah. I feel like some of the best movies, it's like it's not, they have simple plots, but it's like how you get there.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
when did you first see this movie?
I probably saw it in the theater when it came out, and I have no real memory of that. I'm sure I enjoyed it, but I didn't really think about it again until around 2008 Christmas Eve. I'm flipping through the channels, and I think Turner Broadcast was running Elf as a marathon for 24 hours over and
Oh my
over again.
gosh.
And I didn't sit down and watch it for 24 hours straight, but I did keep coming back to it. And me and my girlfriend kept quoting lines from it for weeks afterward and just cracking each other up, and answering the phone saying, "What's your favorite color?" and stuff like that. And it was at that time that I was actually working on a screenplay that wasn't quite working out. And that's when I got the idea to move my story to the North Pole and have Santa Claus be the main character's father.
I love that. Well, I think I saw this in theaters as well, and I really enjoyed it. Because I believe even at the time, even though, you know, Will Ferrell wasn't like a huge star, I was familiar with him because of SNL, and I was a really big SNL fan and watched it pretty religiously. So I was excited about this movie, and then I loved it then. I can't get tired of it. I watch it every year, but I do have a funny story I want to share really quick, and that's that one year a good friend, I was over at her house and with her at the time husband, and she made some mulled wine, and we were watching A Christmas Story. And then we were kind of like, "What should we watch next?" And I'm like, "Have you guys seen Elf?" And they were like, "You know what? I've never seen that." And we're like, "Let's watch it right now." And I couldn't wait for them to see it. We turn it on. My husband and I laugh the entire time. They never smile once.
Oh my God.
And it ends, and they just kind of awkwardly are like, "Well, that was a movie," and like didn't like it. And it's funny because I hear, I think, I'm not trying to call you out too much, Chris Balga, if you're listening, but I feel like Chris, I think he said he just hates Will Ferrell or is just like
Huh.
not a fan, or like he likes other movies with Will Ferrell in them. No, I don't think he hates him because I think we covered a Will Ferrell movie together,
Did he not have
but
enough mulled wine?
yeah, maybe more mulled wine would have helped. But he also didn't like it. And like I feel like there's a camp of people that don't like or some of the Will Ferrell humor.
Sure,
And so
I
if
can see
that's the
that.
case, it's kind of like Jim Carrey. It's like it's a lot. And I guess if you don't like that, you don't like it. But it was just funny to me
Yeah.
because I thought it was such a home run. And I'm showing my friends this movie and they just have such an opposite reaction to what I'm expecting. But luckily, we've got 2 people on this podcast that really like this movie, so that's gonna make it, I think, a little more enjoyable. Um, Let me share a couple of quick facts before we dive in here. The first one I have is that the design for Santa's workshop, as well as the elf uniforms, come from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, 1964. The elf uniforms completely mirror the ones on the television special. Most of the animals in the North Pole are also designed to look like the same form of stop motion used in Rudolph.
Yes, that was probably the first thing that drew me into the movie when I saw it, was because I grew up on those Rankin Bass stop motion animation specials, that and Santa Claus is Coming to Town. So,
Yes, it's funny, like, now realizing that that came out in '64, because as a kid, you're just kinda like any movie that comes out, you're like, "Oh, yay, this just came out," you know?
right.
Like, it's interesting to see how, as an adult to realize how vintage it is. And you and I were kinda talking before we started recording about the Holidays That Made Us Netflix, episode about Elf, which I highly recommend everybody go watch that. Somebody on Twitter recommended it to me, and so I went and watched it. They talk about how that actually became a pretty big problem, how similar it is
Yeah.
to that movie, right?
Right. They almost had to shut down and redo the costumes, and they thought about doing them digitally, covering them up to make them look different, and ultimately they were able to work out their legal issues.
That would be such a nightmare. Ugh, gosh, I'm so glad that it worked out because, like, I don't know, like, it almost doesn't work if you don't have that element tied to it. I think it really adds a lot to the film. The elf Ming Ming, who appears briefly in the beginning of the film, is played by Peter Billingsley, who also starred as Ralphie Parker in the classic holiday film A Christmas Story.
Oh
And I don't
wow!
think I ever noticed that before until I
I
read
didn't know
that.
that either. That's great.
I know, that's so cute. And like when you go back and watch the scene, like it's definitely him, but
Yeah.
yeah, didn't know that until I read that. That's just such a wonderful callback, and I think that's another really great thing about this movie is the whole thing is a callback, not just to the
Oh yeah.
Rudolph movie, but to so many classic Christmas
Well, I
films.
know Ray Harryhausen has a cameo as a voice, doesn't he?
Oh, really?
Oh, you hadn't heard that? Yeah.
I had not
Um,
heard that.
yeah,
Who
I
does he
believe
play?
one of the animated characters
Oh,
for
okay,
sure.
very cool. I love that. I probably just missed that part in the special. I also have that the scene in which Buddy is on the bridge and the snow references a similar scene in another Christmas favorite, It's a Wonderful Life, which
Right.
we've also covered on this podcast and greatly enjoy. And I definitely thought of that scene when that comes
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
The last one, the last callback I wanted to talk about, the Christmas tree being too big for the living room is a nod to National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. We also covered that on this podcast one year,
Right.
where Clark was Griswold also uproots a tree with a family station wagon that is too big for his living room.
Right. I just looked it up. Ray Harryhausen was the voice of the polar bear cub.
Aw, I love that. That's such a cool like Easter egg.
Yeah.
Such a great cameo.
And the stop motion was all done by the Kyoto brothers who did Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie.
What? Really? Oh my gosh, I haven't watched that movie in forever. Somebody should pick that.
Yeah. But they were
That's so
very
great.
influenced by Harryhausen and King Kong before that. And so they must have been thrilled to have him do a voice.
Yeah, to actually work with him, that's so great. Um, so that kind of wraps up my quick facts, and I want to talk a little bit next about Jon Favreau,
Right.
who directed this film. And you learn in that special that we keep referencing that he, well, we know he was an actor, but at the time he wasn't. I think he had directed one other movie.
Right. Well, his big break was Swingers, which he didn't
That's
direct.
right.
He wrote it and starred in it, and Doug Liman directed it, only
Oh,
because
okay, you're
he's the
right.
one who came up with the money for it. They were all nobodies. And Doug Liman said, "Oh, I want to become a director too. I'll give you the 200. It only cost Swingers only cost $200,000.
I did not know that. Wow,
Amazing.
that's
And
so
but
great.
then it was John's pet project. He wrote it. Then he wrote another one called Made, and that one was his directorial debut. I think that one was $5 million, and it didn't do great. So it was surprising that he got to do a big star vehicle. Well, I guess Will Ferrell wasn't really a star yet, but
Yeah,
this,
that was actually a problem in
yeah,
pitching the movies. People were like, "Who is this guy? Like, this isn't a good idea. He's not a star."
right. But this had a $30 million budget, so that was a huge, big step up. And
Oh, for sure.
and it's a studio picture. So, both Swingers and Made were indies. And so this was his first time doing a studio picture. And if he hadn't done this, I don't think he's ever going to get to a point, or a movie like this, he's not going to get to a point where he gets to do Iron Man and all the other Disney movies that he did.
I mean, it's amazing to think that, the career that he's had.
Yeah.
I talk about him almost every week now
Yeah.
because I'm covering The
Mandalorian. Yeah.
Mandalorian. Yeah. And yeah, his contribution to the Star Wars universe and the Disney universe, I mean, it really feels like he's,
And the
you
Marvel
know,
universe. Iron Man was really the
yeah,
start of the cinematic universe.
right, right. Yeah. You're right. Oh my gosh, didn't think of it that way. I think I'm starting to meld Star Wars with Disney
Yeah.
because they own them. So I said Disney and I'm thinking Star Wars. It's happening to me. But
Well,
he did
because for
both
Disney, he
too.
did
The Jungle Book,
Jungle
right?
Book and Lion
Yeah.
King, and did he also do Sorcerer's Apprentice, or
Oh, I'm
did
not
he drop out
sure.
of that?
Oh, I don't
I
know.
forget. Um,
But
yeah. Well, anyway.
yeah, he's great and he loves his
Yeah.
cameos in his movies. He's got a cameo in this one as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think this film really lays the groundwork for him understanding how to use nostalgia in a new project
Hmm.
that calls back to some older stuff but feels fresh, right? Like I think this movie is an instant classic and there's a lot of key ingredients he kind of is inspired by, but it's still his own thing. And
Yeah.
the other thing is it's genuinely funny. Like there's a lot of really funny lines in this movie.
Yeah. No. No. The dialogue, the one-liners, those are the best part about it, I think. But one of the things that Favreau brought to it, the initial script didn't have the Central Park Rangers, and he just felt instinctively that the third act needed more stakes, higher stakes, more danger happening at the same time. And I think that's the kind of thinking that makes him so suitable to be doing Marvel movies and Star Wars, Mandalorian stuff.
Yeah, he understands that like the audience needs higher stakes in
Yeah,
certain
which
situations,
is a
and if
surprise
s
coming from the indie world, where they don't care about where it's more
right.
character based.
Right, and, knowing yeah, what ingredients are needed to make it a solid Hollywood picture,
Yeah.
essentially.
Well, first let's talk about Will Ferrell because
Oh, absolutely.
as a writer, I normally, you know, evaluate my movies on their writing. If I love it, if I hate it, it's almost 95% about the writing. And this is an example where it's really about the star because I've read the script and it's a good script. I don't dislike it. But it doesn't say on the page how Buddy is supposed to overreact, to be over the top with his enthusiasm. That's something that Will brought to the part. And if you cast anybody else in it, it wouldn't be the same.
I agree. Last night, when we were watching it, I was like, nobody else can be this part. It's just not
Yeah.
possible. Like, there's no one else as Will Ferrell. And in fact, when they were when they were writing the script, they were thinking of him, because he's so perfectly suited to this role. And they
Yeah.
were pulling a lot from on SNL. He had a couple characters like the Spartan cheerleaders, and I can't remember the name of them, but when he's that like church group that plays the it's like him and his wife, and they play, like, the piano.
Huh.
I think it's Anna Gasteyer, and anyways, it's really funny, it's a good skit, but, he brings this sort of, like, I don't know, like, innocence to a lot of those characters and, like, just a lot of good-naturedness, and, I think you see a lot of that in Buddy the Elf.
Yeah, the innocence is important because at one time Jim Carrey was attached to this, and I think Chris Farley was attached to it at one time, and they could have probably done the really big stuff, but I don't think they're as good at this innocence part of it, this softness to it that really that makes that makes Buddy so endearing.
Yeah, because the character has potential to be annoying.
Yeah,
He's acting like a giant kid, and but yeah, Will Ferrell understands how to deliver those like annoying bits with a little bit of like sweetness and kindness to where even if you're annoyed, you kind of are like, well, but he's so nice. Like I
yeah,
feel bad. Like I like this guy. And I feel like a lot of times Jim Carrey, um, and maybe not so much with Chris Farley, but with Jim Carrey especially, it's like the being annoying is part of why you like that character, but you're
right.
right, they don't have that, like, innocence or
The
softness to
sweetness.
them.
And then at the same time, there's a lot of similarities between Buddy and the character Tom Hanks plays in Big, because they're both like
I
a man child,
agree.
right? And I think Tom Hanks could easily get the sweetness part of it, but would he have gone, would he have committed to go as all out in the enthusiasm department the way Will Ferrell
Right.
does?
It wouldn't be as big, for
Right.
sure, like, it would be more restrained. I think it would make it a different movie. It wouldn't be quite as funny. It'd be more just, like, sweet, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good point. I mean, this is definitely a movie where it's basically yeah, without Will Ferrell, it doesn't work, so he does deserve a lot of the credit, and what's funny is when they were talking about the behind the scenes, it's that, they almost thought this was gonna be a problem that Will Ferrell was starring in it because literally the same year, Old School came out, and that
Oh
was
yeah.
a really big breakout role for him, and it's like, do we want what was his name on there? Frank the Tank or something? Do we want him to be in
Right.
this children's movie? Like, but luckily it worked. It worked. They're 2
Yeah,
separate
it was a
films,
big
different
gamble for them.
audiences.
It was such a big gamble because and it's hard to remember that he wasn't a star yet, because he was known from SNL, but this was only his second big movie after leaving SNL, and Old School came out, I think, after they shot Elf. So they
Right.
didn't he wasn't established as a star yet, and they didn't know what a movie starring Will Ferrell would be like. And it was very different too, because you like you said, Old School was very R rated and this was very PG rated, you know. So
Yeah, 2 films that I feel like, I don't know, just have done, like I don't know how to say it. They're both classics of that time, I
yeah,
guess. I haven't seen Old School in a long time, but I remember really
right.
enjoying it.
Well, I saw an interview where Will Ferrell was saying that while he was playing Buddy and he was really committed to doing it the way he did it, he figured there's only two possible outcomes because he didn't know if it was going to work. He said it's either going to be the biggest bomb and it's going to end my movie career before it even gets started, or it's going to become a classic. You know, but
Right.
it could have gone either way.
Yeah, it could've he could've been like, "Oh, the actor from Buddy the Elf,"
Yeah.
or from Elf, it's terrible. But luckily for him and for us, it was not. I think he's great casting. I think there's actually a lot of great
Oh,
casting in this movie.
absolutely.
Some really amazing choices, like James Caan as his dad, which is
I know.
like, awesome. Bob Newhart as Papa Elf, Ed Asner as Santa. I mean, this is just great,
Ed
like, great
Asner's a
casting.
classic Santa Claus.
Yes,
He's
and
great.
then, Zooey Deschanel, a relative
Yeah, so
newcomer
she
at the
was also
time.
new at the time. She had done Almost Famous, and she got a lot of attention for that. She was the older sister. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
do, I do.
And then she did another indie movie. What's it called? All the Real Women or All the Real Girls, something like that. Um,
I don't think I'm familiar with that one.
and that had played at Sundance while they were filming Elf. And
Wow.
I never saw it myself, so but I hear she got an audience award for it or something. So,
Yeah, I
and
mean, it's crazy, she's had such a big career now
and Peter
since then.
Dinklage wasn't really known also until the same year. He also had the station agent playing at the Sundance Film Festival that same year while they were making Elf. So he became a
Oh my
big deal too.
gosh.
He got a lot of awards for that.
Well, from watching it this time too, my husband pointed out Amy Sedaris, who is in The
Yeah,
Mandalorian.
yeah. Oh,
So so I was like, "Hey," of course, I don't think of Amy Sedaris as the lady from The Mandalorian, but I am saying that she is in The Mandalorian because Jon Favreau is involved with both projects. But
exactly.
love seeing her. She's hilarious, and she has like kind of a smaller part in this movie, but again, just a
Yeah.
wonderful cast.
And Mary Steenburgen, I don't think she has a lot to do in this movie,
Oh
but she's a great
yeah.
get anyway, and she does it really well.
Yes, she plays such a, like, sweet, endearing mom, and she's also one of the moms in Step Brothers.
Oh, that's right. I
So,
forgot.
yeah. And I always think of her specifically from as Clara from Back to the Future
Right.
3. I think that was probably the first time I saw her, and she's just always so sweet.
Yeah.
She's like the perfect I don't know, she's just such the opposite of Walter in this movie. Like, she's just so sweet and so open-minded and open-hearted, I guess,
It's such an
despite
interesting choice to me that when Walter tells her he has a son from a previous relationship that he didn't even know about, that she reacts with, "Oh, that's fantastic." And I don't think most people would do that, but
they would be like, "You kept this obvious secret from me," and
yeah,
instead she just fully trusts him, and she's like, "This is actually great news. You have another
exactly.
son," which is like, in the grand scheme of things, true. But yeah, I think you're right. I don't know that most
Most
people would
people would
react
take a
that
while
way.
to get there, but this movie
Yeah,
doesn't need that.
right.
And
That's
the
like a different movie.
Right, and the joke at the end of the scene is when he says, "Oh, and by the way, he thinks he's an elf." So if she's still upset about him in that moment, upset about Buddy existing in that moment, then you don't throw the elf thing on top of that. It's not as funny.
Agreed. Agreed.
My first Mary Steenburgen movie was Time After Time. Did you ever see that?
Oh, I don't think I've seen
Oh,
that.
that's an excellent movie.
I need to check that out because I do really like her. Well, did you want to talk about some of your favorite scenes?
Well, I love the whole North Pole sequence because, like I said, that
Yes.
it did exactly what they intended. It brought me back to those Rankin Bass cartoons. Um,
I really like too that his outfit is specifically like the elf that was helping the dentist elf. Is his name
yeah,
Dennis? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I never noticed that until I was watching that special. And I'm like, yeah, so like literally not just the aesthetic, but like they down to the color scheme. I really like that attention to detail and
yeah.
also the sets when they're at the North Pole being so white. I thought that was interesting how they said that in that older movie and in those older films, they kind of got away with some stuff in terms of set building by having just a pure white background so that the
Mhm.
colors like really pop and they just kind of went with that on a bigger scale And I really like that sequence too. I like every time they're at the North Pole.
Yeah, and all the little animals. The narwhal is probably my favorite part of the whole movie. You know, it's just
Another Jon Favreau
yes,
cameo.
it's just 2 seconds, the thing pops up out of nowhere. I don't think I knew what a narwhal was until I saw that. And it's a real thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah, and I learned it from Elf.
You did. We learned so much from Elf, the true meaning of Christmas, and that narwhals are a thing.
Mm. And then, of course, you get into the whole fish out of water. There he is in New York. That whole montage is great at the when he first ends up in New York. I loved watching him run around in the revolving door. I remember when I was a kid and I would go downtown with my dad. I would love to play in the revolving doors. It would piss him off so much.
Doesn't he like eat a piece of gum off the street too?
Yes, he does the gum. There's another bit that I really like where the guys are handing out flyers, and most people don't want to take them. He's taking them so much that they're like, "No, give them back. You can't have any."
I like too when he eats the gum, that calls back to an earlier scene. Doesn't Santa tell him not to
Yeah,
put everything in your mouth, which he does a lot in the movie, but
yeah.
it's kind of like kids, right? I mean, it's like you tell him like don't put that in your
Oh,
mouth, and
sure. And he
it's
says on
very
the
tempting.
commentary that everybody comes up to him and asks him, you know, if that was real gum and how they did
Oh
that.
my gosh.
It's all gum that he chewed himself, and then they put it down on the railing, but they put a clear film that was sanitized on top of it. You can't see; it's transparent, so
Yeah.
he wasn't touching anything that was germy.
He's not quite that method, you
Right.
know? Yeah, I feel like he does this whole fish out of water thing in ways that only Will Ferrell can.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. It's such a great scene.
Yeah, and they came up with a lot of stuff on the spot. It wasn't all written down. The guy wearing the red tracksuit with the white beard, he just was a guy. He wasn't a hired extra. He just was a real New Yorker who just happened to be walking by in that red suit, and they
Those
used it.
improv skills, man. I guess I can kind of say one too. I think one of the scenes that I really, really like is when he first meets his dad.
Mhm.
And just how he thinks that meeting his dad is going to be such like a blissful experience. He's going to welcome in with open arms, and just how hilariously wrong it goes. And I don't know, I enjoy it, all the things he says to him, and um all the improv lines. I think they did a lot of takes where they would say like, okay, read the lines as is, now let's do a retake, and improvise. And I feel like
Yeah.
so many of those improvised lines are in the movie.
And what I liked about the scene is the way they handled the mistaken identity that he everybody just assumes, oh, this is a Christmas gram. A Christmas gram? What's
Oh
that? I
yeah.
want one.
And his song, "You're my
And
dad, I love
yeah,
you."
yeah, because he just says, "Oh, you're gonna sing a song now, right?" And he just launches into this weird song, and it's yeah, everything works out so great.
I think that's the scene too where Amy Sedaris tries to whisper something to James,
Yes,
and
I like
Will Ferrell
whispering
leans in.
too.
He's like, "Why are we whispering?" So great, so great.
Yeah, and then I like the doctor's office scene. That was Jon Favreau's live
Yep.
action acting cameo, um, as opposed to all his animated voices. And I
Yeah.
just the timing of that. There's a big chunk of that first part of it is all in one take. And with the three of
Really?
yeah, I mean, well, if I don't mean that they only did one take, but you can see that the camera's not moving and it's all just there are no cuts. There's no cut to coverage, and the timing is just so well. The whole thing from where he gets his finger, ending with where he gets his finger pricked up until that.
His reaction, yes.
Yeah, so
And oh, go ahead.
all the distractions when he's saying, "Why do you have a skeleton in there?" And why is there paper on this table and all that stuff. All of that was all part of that same take, and it was just so
Oh,
beautifully
gotcha. I see
timed.
what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean,
It's
comedy is all
genius
about
timing.
timing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I like too that it kind of answers a question, or they really weave that into the story about James getting like proof that this is his son, and is you're kind of
Yeah.
like, how are they going to handle that? And like literally just has him come in for a DNA test. I
Yeah.
love the coldness of that.
And there's a one throwaway joke when Jon Favreau comes out of the back room, he's just finished the DNA test, and he says, "It's a boy." I love that line. It's
Yes,
a throwaway line, but it's like, you got to put the dots together a little bit there and say, "Oh yeah, he's saying that you congratulations, you have a son. It's a boy."
it is because it's like I think he's sort of trying to soften the blow
Yeah.
in a way, but also it makes it more surprising and shocking at the same time. Um, I also like his I guess first day at the Christmas store, at the Christmas department
Gimbals,
or
yeah.
toy store, Gimbals. Yeah, okay. Which I guess is that supposed to be kind of like FAO Schwartz, you think, or
Well, no, there was Macy's and Gimbals, and if you're, did you ever see
oh,
Miracle
I
on
didn't know
34th
that.
Street?
Oh yeah, yeah, I definitely have
That
seen
was all
that.
about the rivalry between Macy's and Gimbels. They were both real
Oh
stores, and I
gosh,
think Gimbals, I think,
duh.
went out of business.
Man, I haven't seen that in so long. Or I probably in my mind was like, that's a made up store because I know what
Yeah,
Macy's is, which is kind of what the movie's about.
yeah,
Um,
they were big
but
competitors.
yeah, you're right. But I like they wanted I think Wanda Sykes to be the
Yeah,
boss and they cast different
Faison Love. Yeah,
what was the name? Oh,
Faison
go ahead.
Love. I don't know who he is either. I know
I
that he
feel
was in
like I
Maid.
know his name, but I can't place it. Anyways, Faison Love kept the same Wanda name tag,
I saw
which
that. That was
basically just
cute.
turns into a little funny joke of like, it's like ugh, I don't know, underappreciated
Yeah.
manager. But he I think his reactions to Buddy, like I love when he tries to hype up the team and he's like, Santa's gonna be here tomorrow, and Buddy's like, "Meh," like in his reaction to that. And later in the movie when he doesn't realize that Buddy decorated everything and he thinks someone's gunning for his like oh so important management of Gimbel's job. I liked that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I like his first day at the store.
And then the introduction of Zoe Deschanel's character, with that
Hmm.
weird triple dissolve as we zoom in closer to her, and she's lit classically like an angel and everything. And if you listen, the Macy's or the Gimbel's department store PA is playing. They've been playing Christmas music all along, but when she comes on screen, they play Santa Baby, which is about a woman who's trying to seduce Santa Claus.
Right. And that song comes up later too.
Yeah, so it's very appropriate for her introduction. I also
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I also like the shower scene with baby. It's cold outside. When she realizes he's there, she says, "Get out! Don't look." And he takes her up on those commands literally. He covers his eyes while he's getting out, and he crashes into the lockers. That was hilarious.
That scene is done so well
Yeah.
because I think they were saying in the behind the scenes, like, whenever you first hear someone sing that you didn't know could sing it, there's something sort of like magical and beautiful about it.
Hmm.
And so the fact that he like doesn't see her at first and she's, in the shower, but then right after that you have this very funny scene. But also again displays his innocence, right? Because he's not sneaking into the shower. He's just waltzing in
Right.
there not knowing he's not supposed to be there because he
Yeah.
doesn't know. He just hears beautiful singing and duets her. So it
Yeah.
it kind of just establishes once again that Buddy's always got the best intentions.
Well, right, and they didn't know that Zoe could sing when they cast her. That scene wasn't in the movie, in the script.
Oh
And when
wow.
she had a cabaret show, and I think in Hollywood, so they were aware of that. But I think Favreau said after they cast her, they were all at a birthday party at Mary Steenburgen's house, and she got up and sang, and that's when he decided to add the song "Baby It's Cold Outside."
That's so great.
Yeah,
And I think she released like an album during
sure.
the movie
Uh,
too, and some of those songs were
Yes,
on it
she's
as
got a couple albums out. I think under the name She and Him or something like that.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I remember
yeah,
that.
one of them's a Christmas album. At least one of them is.
I think I've listened to it before, like
She
on
and He.
Spotify too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I can't remember which one. She and he or she and him. I think it's she and him. Yeah, it is she and him. But I remember listening to that album too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Is there another scene?
Well, the food was another thing that's one that I
Oh,
borrowed
yeah.
heavily for North Pole High was the idea that the elves eat or everybody in the North Pole eats a lot of sugar, you know, and I love you know it in this movie it reaches its climax when he puts the crumbles up the Pop Tarts and puts it on top of the mound of spaghetti and marshmallows.
Ugh, I know, and that becomes like I like again Mary's character has to placate him when she packs him like that breakfast with just spaghetti and like maple syrup, I
Yeah,
think. But
yeah.
yeah, they eat a lot of sugar. I think I read a fact on here too. Of course, sometimes you gotta take stuff on IMDb with a grain of salt, but that he was getting like some kind of intense headaches from eating so much
Oh,
sugar
really?
on the set. Yeah.
Wow.
He did have a lot of scenes with sugar, so it's possible.
Yeah. Let's see what else. I I listed some of my favorite quotes, some of my favorite lines. Oh, I
I
forgot to
know
give
it's
you a
hard. It's like,
hug.
how do you do it without going through the entire movie line scene by scene? You don't have to do that. I won't make you do
Smiling's my
it.
favorite. That's a good one.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, at the in the doctor's office, I was going to mention this before. My finger has a heartbeat. That is such a
Oh,
weird line.
yeah.
And you know when he says it, you go, "Oh, that's right, it does." Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, "I felt that before." Oh, you know what I wanted to talk about too was all the forced perspective stuff.
Oh yeah.
Favreau made the decision, which is kind of funny now considering how much he uses special effects, um, to not use that so much, and so almost all the scenes, displaying how large he is compared to the elves in the beginning, and in some flashbacks, it's forced perspective.
Yeah. And they did it really
Oh, go
well.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially the scene with Bob Newhart. I really like seeing how they did that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it all goes with keeping that whole nostalgia feel for the old 1960s cartoons because they certainly didn't have digital effects in those days, and but they took simple old tricks, but they really put a more attention to detail than you would have in the 60s or even in the 30s when they were first. I'm sure the Lumiere brothers were probably doing this in the late 1800s, but not as seamlessly as they did here.
Yeah, I think they had a little bit of apprehension with it at first because it's like this is technology or these are tricks that they haven't used in like 50 years.
Yeah.
So they were trying to kind of update them and it is really successful. I like with the Bob Newhart riding on his back scene that they had Bob Newhart like on a tiny little bicycle and then there was a kid and it was a kid's hands
Right.
on like the teenage buddy. Just stuff like that is just so wonderful to me. I love it.
Yeah.
Um Another thing I kinda wanted to talk about too is, uh, his, James Caan's character's son, the other son.
Oh, right.
Um, yeah, because that's kind of a through line in the movie too. Through this whole experience, he even improves his relationship with his son, which it's kind of barely mentioned in the beginning, but kinda keeps coming up throughout the film that he's not really connecting with his son. He doesn't spend a lot of time with him. He prioritizes his job over his relationship with him and uh, you know, Will Ferrell's character and he end up forming a bond. There's a great snow fight scene
Mhm.
in the movie, but by the end, he becomes like I think more of a kid. He's got more of that innocence and warmth to him, and his relationship with his father gets better.
Yeah, it's interesting because the whole movie is really built about around Buddy. You know, the one character, Buddy, and everybody is supporting character to him, except the one character who really relates to him on a level who just gets him is Michael, the kid, because Buddy is also like a 10-year-old, and they understand each other. And yeah, he was written in the draft of the script that I read. He was written a little bit harsher, a little bit meaner, a little bit more of a punk, not a little bit more reluctant to become Buddy's friend. And I think they softened that a little bit and made them bond a little bit quicker.
I think that works better because
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like they can overplay that kind of stuff with child characters
Hmm.
in a way that makes them, I think, a little bit too. much of a stereotype and not enough of like a real person. So I kind of like that. Yeah, obviously he's going to think Buddy's weird, but yeah, he's a kid and a lot of stuff that Buddy does is very kid-like. It makes sense that they would connect and um I like that, and I liked when you saw the behind the scenes stuff that, the whole story is about a connection with the father, two people connecting with the father, two sons, and how that relates to the writers, the fact that he lost his father at a young
Yeah,
age. And so this is sort of like a exploration of that. He loves Christmas and just like what a wonderful tribute,
yeah.
um, to that
Well,
relationship.
and also in general, the movie has no cynicism in it, and yet it's not overly
True.
sentimental.
Agreed. Yeah, that's a really hard balance,
Yeah.
especially with who Buddy is as a character.
Mhm.
It still doesn't become so like, forgive the pun, sweet that
Right.
that it's too much. It manages to stay funny and fresh and have heart, but not go overboard.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the mark of something that ends up, you know, becoming a classic and not
Oh,
just for
absolutely.
kids.
You mentioned the bridge scene before that was reminiscent of "It's a Wonderful Life," and the thing that I always remember about that scene is have you ever heard of a book called Save the Cat? It's
No.
it's a book about screenwriting. It's mostly for people who want to learn screenwriting, and it teaches the formula. You have to do this in the first act, and so on and so forth. And one of the things he says in the book is that just before you go into the third act, you have to have something called the whiff of death. Even if a character doesn't die, you have to have
Oh.
some allusion to somebody dying, maybe dying, thinking about dying. And as the example he uses in the book, he says, "Take a look at Elf. Here's this silly goofy kitty movie, and there's Buddy on a bridge contemplating suicide right at the spot where you're supposed to do that in every screenplay."
Yeah, and they do it in such a way that where I think if you're a kid, that's not on your mind. You're just thinking, "Oh, he's going out to get a breath of fresh air and he's sad. I've been sad before." But as an adult, you're like, "It's getting a little dark."
Yeah.
But it kind of pushes that boundary, but then pulls back. Like
Mhm.
you're saying, it's like it's what they need to do to kind of raise the stakes.
Yes.
It's hard. We're feeling the emotions that the character feels, however that's comes across to us. So it can't be muted, right? We've got to understand like how bad he feels. And that's a really, you know, direct way to tell us how bad he's feeling, right? So I think
Right.
it paints a picture for the audience for sure. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I'll have to read that book.
You know what else strikes me? You were talking about how you're surprised that these Rankin Bass cartoons are so old that they're from the '60s. I'm actually shocked that Elf is 17 years old. That's how long ago it came out. There are kids in high school who would hear about this probably, assuming today, and say, "Oh, that's some old movie that came out before I was born."
Yeah, you're not wrong. It
That's
was
how
a while
old this.
ago.
It's hard for me to think of this as being that old of a movie.
Yeah, when I think the 90s were 10 years ago, it doesn't seem that old to me, but yeah, it is.
And
Yeah, I have to think about like where was I at that moment? I don't remember, but yeah, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago at all. I
yeah,
mean, it
and
doesn't feel that long ago to me when Will Ferrell was like a new star in SNL either,
yeah,
so I'm like,
yeah.
"Whoa." But yeah, yeah.
Well, on that same note, though, the other thing that surprised me is uh, Favreau talks on the commentary about how it was a little bit tricky to get some of the New York locations they wanted because this was filmed just a year or two after 9/11, and so New York was still kind of
Mm.
skittish about everything. And it made me wonder if it came out in 2003, we're talking about 2 years after 9/11. Maybe it was just the right time that people needed something wholesome and fun and uplifting and non-cynical to kind of get back to normalcy a little bit. And maybe that's what helped it become the hit that it became to some
I
extent.
agree, and being set specifically in New York too.
In New York, and not having any such cynicism and not having
Yeah.
any reference to these terrible things that were going on in the world.
Yeah, it kinda reminds you of, like, movies in the '50s that were
Hmm.
sort of like, "Forget about World War II, let's all sing and dance," it's like, when you put it under that lens, it does kind of make you understand a little more why people wanted and turned to something so uplifting. I think you're right about that.
Yeah. This was turned into a Broadway musical.
Oh, that's
We
true.
can
Have you
talk about
seen
that.
it?
I have not seen it, but they did an animated special that was based on the musical. I've seen that version.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
in 2014, they did that, and that was in the animated special. Jim Parsons was Buddy. Mark Hamill
I
was
could see
Walter.
that.
Yeah, Mark
I
Hamill
love
was
that Mark
Walter.
Hamill. That's
Uh,
precious.
Kate Micucci from Garfunkel and Oates was Jovi, and I know I've heard you mention Garfunkel and Oates before.
Oh yeah, we just did Knives Out, and she
Yes, on
plays a
that one.
minor
Yeah.
role in that film. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, she was Jovi. On the Broadway version, George Wendt from Cheers was Santa Claus, and then when
How
he left the
cute.
production, what?
I said, how cute.
Yes, yeah, he's another great choice. And then he left the production, and Wayne Knight from Seinfeld and Jurassic Park took over.
Nice. Oh, that's so weird to think that he's old enough to be Santa Claus, but
Yeah,
that does make sense.
yeah. Oh,
Anything?
Artie Lang.
Oh,
He
oh
played
yeah.
the fake Santa. I was and at the time he was on. I think he was still on the Howard Stern show. I was a big fan of that show at that time.
Ah,
So
gotcha.
that
Didn't
was
notice that.
that was a fun
Very
cameo.
good.
Peter Dinklage. We talked a little bit about him. His scene was great.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like, that scene could come across as insensitive, but I feel like Buddy did it in such a way where the lines are delivered in such a way where it's not. It's more just like him being annoying.
Yeah, I think he was reaching that point in his career where he didn't want to take parts anymore that were specific to his height. But I think he did that
Yeah.
one because he that I heard this somewhere that he just felt like this was such a good movie and he couldn't pass up particular part.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure that the younger kids watching this now would go, "Oh, that's the guy from Game of Thrones."
Right, right. I mean, that's like the first thing you think of now. Well, let's see. I think we may have covered everything.
I think so. We could just keep talking
Yeah.
about the great lines. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, we
see,
can. The movie's an hour and 37 minutes, so I feel like these episodes always tend to be short because of that.
I'm a cotton-headed ninny muggins is a great line.
One time, someone at work said that line, and I could not remember what it was from until he explained it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, how did I forget about that?"
Oh, son of a nutcracker. That's another one that that whole idea of using those
Like
replacement
Christmas.
yeah words expletives. I used that a lot in North Pole High. I didn't use that particular one. I came up with like swans are swimming as an exclamation and lords are
Love it,
leaping.
love it. Yeah, there's a lot of amazing, like, quotes in this movie.
Do you want to go eat food? You know the code.
She's like, "No." The kid's like, "Alright, we gotta go now."
Right?
Yeah, the "What's your favorite color" that you mentioned earlier, I really like that too.
That's a great
That's
one.
such a kid thing to ask. "What's your favorite color?"
Call me elf one more
"Francisco." That's
time.
so fun to say.
Francisco, that's fun to say. The best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear. It's a great
Yeah.
line.
When he burps for, like, a solid minute, that was good.
Yeah.
"Did you hear that?" He says right after.
I like the idea also of Christmas spirit being this measurable thing that powers the sleigh.
Yes. And
And
that Oh, go ahead.
well, that whole thing where they need one more voice to sing. James Caan has to stop mouthing and actually sing in order for
Yeah.
the sleigh to rise. They got that idea from Horton Hears a Who.
Oh, okay. Did not notice that.
Right?
I also liked, I like anytime Walter says something really dry, like that scene where Emily's like, "We can't just throw him out in the snow," and he's like, "Why not? He loves the snow. He told me 15 times."
Yeah,
He's got
yeah.
so many lines like that
Yeah,
in
and
that
James
movie.
Caan, it's interesting that we talked about Will Ferrell being so over the top, and James Caan was deliberately underplaying everything, and I don't think Favreau was prepared for that at first. But he says after he saw what the dailies were looking like, he realized that was the right way to go, because if he had been really upset and angry and frustrated and yelling at Buddy the whole time, it would be very one note, and you
Mhm.
wouldn't have that build up to the one time he finally just blows up at him and says, "I wish you weren't my son," and then that has some gravitas to it because it's been building.
Yes, and it's such a great payoff, and then his devastation after that scene,
Yeah,
which feels like both sad, but also it's funny because he finally got to explode, and because we know who James Caan is, right? I mean,
right.
we want him to be like from The Godfather, and so he finally gets that big moment. I even saw that for that scene, Favreau pulled him aside and he's like, "Remember who you are," kind of thing. Like you need to put some, gangster vibe on this one,
Yeah,
and it works really, really well. Like you said, I think him being the straight man the whole movie, leads to this big scene, which gives it, like you said, a lot of gravitas.
yeah. And I also heard Will Ferrell told a story once, or he said at the premiere, it's the first time everybody was seeing the finished film. James Caan came up to Will Ferrell afterwards and says, the whole time we were on set, I thought you were just overplaying it and just way too over the top. Now I see what you were doing. So,
He's like, "Oh, well, thanks for all that faith in me."
so you have two actors on complete opposite ends of the spectrum, and it just worked perfectly together.
Yeah, it was giving me like, and I keep coming back to this just because he's another comedian that's sort of big in his performance, but it's giving me kind of Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones vibes. you know,
Yeah,
it could end up being a bad thing like it was in that case. But yeah, I'm glad that they weren't like at odds with each other, but it is funny, like they are so different that it probably is hard for him to understand like the sort of improvisational acting style,
yeah,
which I'm sure would be kind of off-putting or at the very least difficult for actors that are not used to that, you know?
yeah. And we're not used to
Yeah.
seeing James Caan in a comedy.
Right,
So,
right. Which is what makes that casting so great.
oh yeah, perfect.
When you picked this movie too, I had to go back and just double check that we hadn't covered it yet.
Oh,
Because I was like, "How have I not covered this?" But it's because I'm not picking them.
it's
No
so
one had picked it yet,
rare.
that's all it is.
I mean, there've been Christmas movies in the last 17 years, in the last 20 years. It's so hard to come up with a new classic Christmas movie. I mean,
Yes.
you've got your It's a Wonderful Life, and you've got a million versions of Christmas Carol, but this was something new and original, and it was familiar. That's one of the hooks, was the familiarity, but it was its own thing. That's why it lives
Yeah.
on. It was turned into a musical, and people are going to enjoy it on the stage for years to come.
Yeah, and it was such a big shock, I think, to the film industry too, because I think they played a clip in that special we watched where it was like a Siskel and Ebert clip of,
Yeah,
just
right,
saying
right.
like
Roger Ebert.
what Roger Ebert was, yeah, it was like, yeah, I thought I was gonna hate this. Like because it does kind of look like one of those throwaway movies, like,
Yeah,
if you just see the cover, you're like, oh, this is gonna be gimmicky and like I'm not gonna enjoy it. And it's like I don't know what makes something that should be gimmicky so good, but
yeah.
just a good script, a good story, and a good cast,
Well,
and
and it's also
great directing.
like your friends who just have a bias against Will Ferrell. I think I would guess that Roger Ebert was not a fan of Old School. You know,
Right,
and
right.
so
Yeah, I
he might
can't
have been
really see him
expecting
being
that.
like, "Wow, I loved that movie." Yeah. Well, and comedy's so subjective too,
Yeah,
so and he is an actor that he doesn't play subtle performances, so
yeah.
it's kind of a love him or hate him sort of thing. And yeah, I can imagine someone seeing that like, "Oh gosh, I have to watch this guy for an hour and a half just screaming." Kind of. But
and
it's
then
really funny.
and then just a couple years after this, John Favreau's buddy Vince Vaughn tries to make his PG Christmas movie, Fred Claus. It just didn't work. It was
Yeah,
okay. It
yeah.
wasn't terrible. It had its
I
moments.
haven't seen it,
Yeah,
but I remember, like, the cover of it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I got nothing against Vince Vaughn, but he is not Will Ferrell, he is not.
Yeah, it didn't turn into a classic. Like I said, I enjoyed it because I was watching a lot of Christmas stuff at that time because I was, trying to get steeped in the lore for while I was writing North Pole High. So I did watch Fred Claus for that reason, and it's watchable. It's just it's not going to be an endearing classic the way Elf is.
Yeah, gotcha.
I'll let you in on a little secret. I before that moment that I started watching Elf over and over that one day, I was not a big fan of not only Christmas movies but Christmas in general. I I,
Really?
I was raised Jewish in a very Jewish
Oh.
neighborhood, so we just my parents, our parents, the whole all my classmates' parents too. They just kind of kept Christmas out of our homes. We didn't really talk about it. We knew it existed because it was in the pop culture. So, like I said, we watched the TV specials, and every sitcom that you watched had a Christmas episode. So we knew it existed, but we weren't. I think that our generation really started the whole thing about giving 8 presents on Hanukkah, really so that we
Oh,
wouldn't feel
gotcha.
left out at Christmas. I don't think that was what
Well
the original Hanukkah was invented for.
well, the writer kinda talks about how him being, Jewish,
Yeah.
yeah, and his connection to Christmas also, so
Mhm.
I feel like there's something there.
Yeah.
You share a connection with that.
So I knew a lot of the tropes, but then I had to make up for lost time. A friend of mine says that was the year that my heart grew 3 sizes.
Yeah, that's awesome, I love that. Um, well, that kinda brings me to my last couple of questions for you then. If you had to sum up, what you love so much about this movie, I know we talked about for the last hour or so why you love it and, your newer found love for Christmas, but if you had to sum up why you love this movie so much, what would you say?
I think it's because it is a wholesome family Christmas movie that kids can enjoy on their level, but I think it's really intended more for the older viewers who want that nostalgia for the old Christmas movies and the old Christmas TV specials that they grew up on. And it's not really it works for kids who believe in Santa Claus, but I think it works better for people who are past the Santa Claus phase but just want to be in on the joke of saying, well, yeah, that's what it might be like if this crazy Santa Claus stuff came to the real world. There, they would crash into that culture with that whole juxtaposition that we see, and I think that's the main joke that doesn't get old through the full runtime of the movie, and
I think you're
also
right.
and also at the end it's funny and it's heartwarming.
Yeah, and I think, the adults in the film, just like a lot of your classic Christmas movies, there's all these cynics, right, about Christmas. Ah,
Hmm.
Christmas isn't that great. And as we get older, I was talking about this actually on Katie's podcast on Slice of Film. We were talking about Christmas Vacation and how when you're an adult, it's like the magic of Christmas, especially for those of us that were sort of raised with constant Christmas stuff our whole lives. We're like, man, I wish I could get some of that back. That
Yeah,
feeling I had when I was a little kid on Christmas morning. And I think everyone kind of goes through a few years where they're like, man, that's over, and now Christmas is just stressful and draining. But I think as you get past that, you kind of start looking back and you're like, well, how do I get some of that little nostalgia back? How do I immerse myself in Christmas
right.
spirit, or at least I do.
Well,
And I think you're right. I think this movie is sort of, I mean, children can watch it, but it does feel a little bit more aimed at adults who are trying to recapture that magic that they felt as a kid. And that's part of why it's so relatable, I think.
yeah, and that's also the area that I was trying to hit in North Pole High. That I got some responses from publishers saying, well, you should really write it as a middle grade story because that's the audience that still believes in Santa Claus. And I said, no, mine is about Santa's teenage daughter, and she's dating a boy on the naughty list, and it's very much targeted at the YA audience on purpose. And the readers aren't supposed to be people who are teenagers who still think that Santa is real. They're supposed to be people who are past that, just like the audience for Elf, who will have
Oh,
fun with
okay.
playing with the tropes.
Yeah, because it's kind of fun. Like you said, they're in on the joke.
Yeah.
Um, Also, how do you pitch Elf to someone that hasn't seen it before?
Um, hmm. Kind of what I was just saying, just that it's funny and it's heartwarming and it's an instant Christmas classic. It's not cynical, but it's not sappy. It just has the perfect balancing act, and you will laugh and you will have your heart warmed.
I agree. And I think, instant classic, that
Yeah,
feels like a phrase that can get thrown around too much sometimes.
absolutely.
But in this case, it's exactly what it is because of the fact that it calls back to so many classics. I think
Hmm.
there's a reason why it works so well, and you can really see the through line from this to like The Mandalorian, how Favreau is able to,
Oh yeah.
tap into our nostalgia and still bring us something new. And yeah, I would say, do you like Christmas and do you enjoy laughing? You
And
will
if you're a
probably
fan of
like
Favreau's
both.
career, it's an important
Yeah,
key.
it's good to
And
see where he came from,
yeah,
for sure. Well, Dan, this was really a fun episode to discuss. Like I said, I love this movie. I liked hearing about your connection to it. So you'll have to come back and talk about some more films sometime.
I hope so. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me back.